Hello, BookTube. I thought I'd give you a little update on one of the many reading events that's happening in March on BookTube. One of those many events is Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, the book club connected to Michael K. Vaughan's BookTube channel. The cheapest book club on the internet, because every book that's in Roger's Cheap Old Book Club is technically free on Project Gutenberg. You have to be okay with reading ebooks. But if you are, you can just download something from Project Gutenberg. It's the easiest thing in the world. It'll work on any device, any platform, anything like that. Some of them have pictures. Some of them have the original illustrations. The 39 Steps is the book that Roger is doing for March. It has had 1 million editions. Paperback, hardcover, deluxe, folio, society, illustrated, not illustrated. 1 million editions. And it came out in 1915 and made its author's reputation. This is the 39 Steps by John Buchan. It made its author's reputation. It launched him in the world in a way that I don't think even he could have anticipated. Not the sheer seismic side of it, how popular this thing was. And it's been perpetually adapted to screen and stage and whatnot. And I was planning on reading it during the month of March. I've read the 39 Steps many, many times, but I was planning on rereading it for the month of March for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. And I made the mistake 2 nights ago of dipping into the book. That's all I planned on doing. Just get the old scent back and then put it aside and get to it later in the month. We're only in the 2nd of March. And I was sucked in so strongly that I don't think I even took a breath until I was halfway through the book. So I thought I would give you a report on it. I don't know if I'll have anything else to say on it for the month of March, but since I read it, I might as well. The novel takes place in 1914, and it is it's the story of Richard Hannay. The main character is Richard Hannay. He's in his late 30s. He made his pile in Africa. So he was in Africa in the colonial apparatus of the British Empire, working a mine. He was a mining engineer, involved in every aspect of that, mining chemicals and whatnot. Probably owned a bit of the proceeds because he came out of Africa a wealthy man. He had also been involved in the colonial wars in Africa. He'd killed people. And not just in war. A character in this book encounters him out of nowhere and identifies him as Hannay the murderer. So he had been on the wrong side of the law in addition to the wrong side of colonial politics. But he is back in London. He has made his pile of money and he is back in London. And he is finding it crushingly dull. He worries his investment bankers about his money, but he's in fine shape. He's not enormously wealthy, but he's not going to have to work or anything. But out of boredom, he bothers them. Out of boredom, he goes to his club. Out of boredom, he goes to shows. But nothing's doing anything for him. He feels like he's dying inside. And he decides at the beginning of this book that he's going to give London one more day to interest him, to give him something that's interesting, to make him feel the thrill that he felt when he was hunting big game on the veldt in Africa. And London does. In the first of, I don't even know if it's possible to count how many coincidences or authorial interventions in this book there are. I don't know if it's possible even to count the number. But in the first of those, a wiry little man named Scutter grabs him by the elbow as he's getting into his house one night. Says, I need to talk to you. Will you let me in? Hannay is bored out of his skull. He's ready to leave. He's so bored, so he lets Scutter in. And Scutter tells him a story about how a Greek ruler is coming to London for a secret conference and that there is a plan afoot to kill him at that conference. And he's got all the details in a little black book that he keeps taking notes in. And what he wants to tell Richard Hannay this because, as he tells Hannay, I'm a dead man. And Hannay says, well, you look pretty alive to me. And he says, nope. I faked my own death. And now I need to disappear. And I need your help to do that. I need you to help me disappear. No one is going to look for me here. And my enemies, the enemies that are conspiring in this plot to kill the Greek minister, will be momentarily at ease, momentarily thrown off if they think I'm dead. And Hannay agrees. Instead of going to the cops, tossing the guy out on his ear, saying that he's nuts, he agrees. And gets to know Scutter a little bit. A little bit enough to know that all of his instincts tell him that Scutter is honest. And then he comes back one day to his apartment and Scutter is dead with a knife through his face. A knife so far through his chest that it's pinioning him to the floorboards. Someone has come into Hannay's apartment and killed this guy. And rifled through the apartment, obviously looking for the little black book, which Hannay finds. By random chance, he finds where Scutter hid the little black book. But he realizes one thing right away, which is that whoever did this is going to want to kill him too. Whoever did this knows that Scutter was in his apartment, probably talking his head off to Hannay for a long time, long enough to give away secrets that Hannay can't be allowed to keep. So he knows that he also has to disappear. He knows that those enemies will know that he knows too much, and he also knows that the London police, who don't know him from Adam, will automatically assume that he killed Scutter. The dead man was found in his own apartment. So he decides to go on the run. And in order to do that, the very first step in going on the run is that he needs to get out of his apartment. He assumes he's being watched. He assumes the building is being watched. So he waits impatiently for the milkman to show up. And here, those of you who were born in the 21st century or in the second half of the 20th century are going to need to Google this. But once upon a time, the milkman made his rounds first thing in the morning, delivering bottles of fresh milk to your doorstep. Depending on what you ordered, depending on what your consignment was, if you had a big family, you might get a bracket of a container of 6 little bottles of milk. You'd get 1 bottle, 2 bottles, depending on what you needed. And your man, your servant, your maid or cook or whatever would take care of that. You never saw it, but you knew that it came. Hannay has an idea. The milkman who typically delivers his milk is about his size. This is the first of probably 100 people that Hannay meets who happen to be just about his size so that he can swap clothes with them. You get the point, you get the feeling after a while, halfway through this book, you get the feeling that everyone in England is about his size. He proposes to the milkman that he wear the milkman's uniform out of the building. He says that it's just a lark, and he offers the milkman a huge amount of money. And the milkman agrees. He's game for the job. Another coincidence. The milkman should easily have said, not a chance in hell. I'm not going to lose this job because of you and some crazy bet. But instead, he doesn't. He agrees. And Hannay gets out of the building. And he has to force his way past train guards to get on a train. And then he gets into the country. He figures if he can get into the countryside, up in Scotland, in the heather and the heath, he can avoid capture. Because it'll be like the veldt. It'll be like his tracking days. He'll feel, if he's far away, if he's in the city, he's a sitting duck. He needs to be out in the countryside where he can evade capture. Because he feels certain that capture is coming. And estimates all along the way, every step of every chapter that we get here, every step of his journey on the train, then on to a platform, then switching to another train, and then switching out into the countryside. At every step, we think that his pursuit must be far behind. Surely nobody in London has even begun to figure this out. But at every step, he is saying they must be right on my heels. And that helps to up the tension. The main character is more nervous than you are. That really helps to up the tension. He makes his way into the countryside and just starts traversing it. He wants to get deep, deep into the country of Scotland. Early on in the book, we get there are many little notes of genius in this book. Buchan has a genius way about him. I think that toward the end of his composition of this book, he knew that this had the potential to go what we would call Megaviral. I think by that point he knew that he'd come up with some absolute corker ideas. And one of them is a menacing plane. Hannay is no sooner in the countryside than he notices a plane that is looking. It's quartering the countryside. It's obviously not some sort of primitive mail delivery or a government survey or anything like that. It's looking for him. The plane is looking for him. And any of you who know this book know that that becomes absolutely nerve-wracking, that plane is everywhere. It seems to be everywhere. He roughs it. Hannay gets a lot of lucky breaks, a lot of them. He meets people who are willing to help him without knowing anything about him. He meets people who are willing to help him even though they know he's a wanted criminal. By now, his name is associated with the murder at his flat. He meets people who are willing to help him at every step of the way, and they're always his same size of clothing. He meets an amiable aristocrat's son who needs his help to give a speech, but is perfectly happy to help him otherwise, feed him until he's full to bursting. He realizes that he's being chased by the bad guys. And he remembers Scutter's description of one bad guy in particular who has a way of hooding the expressions on his face in a terrifyingly intelligent person. He remembers that description because later on in the book, they meet. Later on in the book, in his headlong flight from pursuit, he literally bundles straight into that man's parlor. Which leads to another cascade of coincidences. This book is full of coincidences. Hannay has more lucky breaks than you can imagine. Even when he accidentally runs straight into the man who wants to capture him. That man puts him in a cellar that is full of mining equipment. Explosives you would use in a mine. Exactly the thing that Hannay knows how to use from his experience in Africa. He's able to make an explosive. It should have you howling by that point. You should be saying, oh, come on. How often is this going to happen? Come on. But I feel certain if you read this book for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, you're going to feel the same thing that I felt when I allegedly dipped my toe into this. I don't think there's a more propulsively readable novel written in English. I just don't. I don't think there is. It never lets up for a minute. There is a twist, even if they're dorky twists, there is a twist literally everywhere. It never stops. Never. None of the other Hannay has reoccurred in other Buchan novels. He comes back as a character. None of the other books can say that. But this one, it's a lightning bolt. An absolute lightning bolt. Even when Hannay, first of all, he learns from deciphering the Little Black Book that he was wrong. Scutter was lying, but he was hiding an even worse truth. And he was naming people that he thinks might be able to help Hannay, and Hannay needs to find them. And even when he does, and starts to get the machinery in motion, after having endured many a tense manhunt in the most barren land in the world, you actually don't know what Hannay's thinking to flee to the Highlands of Scotland, where, as he puts it, there isn't cover for a fly. He must have known that. He does it anyway. You'd think he'd head for the forest or mountains or something like that, but no. He goes where anyone could spot him, especially that menacing plane. But even when he gets to all these people, there's still a twist on every page, and certainly at the end of every chapter, so that you don't know how this is going to come out, and you've got to keep learning. And I was affected the same way, even though I've read this I don't know how many times. I could not put it down. As usual, with the 39 steps, I could not put it down. And the fact that I couldn't put it down, how to put this, the more I've read this, as time goes on, especially now in the 21st century, which I criticize a lot. I criticize the 21st century a lot for how picky it is, how thin-skinned it is, how snowflakey it is, how censorious it is, how judgmental it is, how controlling and fascistic it is. Nevertheless, I do that because I think those things have been taken way to excess by young people with too much time on their hands, and too indulgent parents. But nevertheless, it is true and positive that in the 21st century, we have all raised our sensitivity towards a lot of cultural crudity. A lot of stuff that we just ordinarily said when I was much younger is not acceptable to say anymore, and that's a good thing. Those things were bad to say. They coarsen the mind. To use those words also coarsens the mind. To use those attitudes. It's good. The positive side of that horrible, over-exaggerated 21st century reaction on Twitter and elsewhere, the positive side of that is good. It's good that we can pick a book that was written 100 years ago and have moments that pull us up short. Not because we want to censor the author, not because we want to change Roald Dahl's novels or P.G. Wodehouse's wordings, but not because we want to change it at all, but just because, no, that's not okay to say anymore. That's not okay to write anymore. And an author who's assuming that his readers share his bigotries ought to be told that's not true. I don't share your bigotries, and you shouldn't have them. That's the positive side of that whole 21st century thing. And oh my God, are you going to encounter that in this book? You're not going to be hit over the head with it, I don't think. Not quite as bad as you could be. But you are going to encounter it. The coincidences are going to pile up too much for you. Especially one in particular involving a man that Hannah meets on the road in the middle of nowhere in the heather in Scotland that he actually knows. No way. No how. That is just the author reaching into the book. That's all. And that's intolerable. But when Hannah talks about a fat cat in the city who's got it real easy, and you're thinking, okay, well, if Hannah's on the run and he's really hungry and he's really thirsty and he wonders if every man's hand is against him, as he puts it in this book, okay, then he would feel resentful about that fat cat in the city. Sure, until you turn to the next paragraph, and the way Buchan is describing that fat cat in the city is, that fat Jew. And you just stop. You just stop. Because you don't want to read that anymore. You don't want to be complicit in it anymore. And if you're enjoying the book, and I guarantee you will enjoy the book, when you get to that point, you're going to feel complicit. You're going to say, maybe I shouldn't be enjoying this. Maybe I shouldn't be reading this. You should. It is an incredible story, and you are a three-dimensional, nuanced adult. That should not ruin your reading experience. Same thing when, it's the beginning of the book. Buchan is famous for a line that's in another novel where Hannah is given a horrible task by his intelligence headmasters and says, well, that's an awful lot to ask a white man to do. You stop dead. I mentioned that when I was talking about the book. You stop dead when you get to that line in another book. That happens in this book too, on a couple of occasions. But right at the beginning of the book it does, where when Hannah agrees to help Scutter says, well, I have to say, you're a white man. You just recoil. You just recoil. Because of how often those things are scattered throughout this text, including little bits and pieces about that old friend that Hannah meets on the road, who I think from the general hailstone of insults that we get is probably meant to be gay. When you get to any point like that in this book, you are going to realize something that is, I think, unavoidable, which is a lot of people will say about 39 Steps or a book like it, well, he was writing the argot of his time. He was an author of his time. Okay, no. No. There were plenty of people in 1915 who were not racist. Plenty of them. No. You get to that enough times in this book, a fat greasy Jew, or it's a lot more. It's a lot to ask a white man to do, or something like that. You get to enough of those in a book like this, especially this book, which is so addictively readable, and you start to come to a conclusion that is unavoidable, which is that Buchan was a racist. Buchan was a bigot. Okay, he's making it clear. He's not writing this for the argot of his day. He's writing it for his argot. He's writing it for the way he thought. Okay, all right. If you are part of the Twitter crowd in the 21st century, you're going to get to that realization. You're going to realize, okay, he's not mimicking a character here. He thinks this way. He has these stupid, grotesque, soiling opinions. If you're part of the 21st century, which I don't think I have any readers who are, I don't think I have any readers who are part of the Twitter mob, you will get to that realization. You'll say, well, if I know that he's a bigot, then I don't want to read anything that he wrote. Okay. All right. Fine. Of course, if you're part of the 21st century Twitter mob, you won't say that, right? You won't say that. If you're part of the 21st century Twitter mob, you'll say, oh, it's obvious now that he was a bigot. Oh, I don't want to read this. And I don't want you to be able to read it either. The fascist element always pops out. It's not just, oh, well, I don't want to read him if he's a bigot. It's, I don't want you to be able to read him. I don't want anybody to be able to read him. Of course, you won't take it that far. I'm hoping you won't do it at all. Because if you think that way, first of all, you're going to encounter that sort of stuff right away in this book. Not only with Scutter's mention of, I have to say you're a white man, but also it's pretty clear that Hannah's hands in Africa were not clean at all. To put it mildly, I think that he was engaged in exploitive labor. Let's just put it that way. You're going to hit those notes right away, and they keep coming. They don't fill the book by any means. Oh my God, there are going to be dozens and dozens and dozens of pages stretches where all you can do is postpone meals and train stops and conversations with loved ones to find out what is going to happen next. He has nothing. He has no help and he is being driven. Lines of hunters scouring the gorse and the heath looking for him, meaning to kill him. You're going to spend dozens and dozens of pages of this thing just wondering how he's going to get out of it all. How on earth is this going? How is he going to survive the search? Let alone is he going to succeed in Scutter's mission, in saving the world, in saving civilization? Oh my God. It is so perfectly done. The only reason I bring up the bigoted little tin notes is because you're going to notice them. Especially, a lot of you are taking Roger's Cheap Old Book Club in your stride, so you are just proceeding blindly. And that's as you should be. Michael K. Vaughan is one hell of a recommender for books. You are going to love this. But if you don't know anything about it, you're going to read it and come across those notes. My strong advice would be to just take them in your stride. And I think I'm preaching to the converted. I think you already know how to do that. So the only report I want to make about 39 Steps is, boy, oh boy, does it still work. Oh my God, it shouldn't in so many ways. The author is pretty clearly an odious person. And also, the book is full of coincidences and full of them. Oh my God, just choked to the brim. Whenever he meets someone, they are his size in clothing. Whenever he meets someone, they are willing to help him at risk of their own neck. Right to the end. It's just, you ought to be just howling, and you're not. You're just not, because it is the most narratively kinetic thing you've ever read. So, I shot my wad when it came to Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. I thought I was going to put this off and maybe talk about it deliberately. Maybe, God forbid, talk about it in installments. There is no way to read this book in installments. You might not be physically able to read the whole thing because your day closes in on you, but you're not going to want to stop until you get to the end, which is not true for the other Hannah novels. So hats off to Roger for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. I did it early. I'm done with this particular March event. I just wanted to make a book report on the whole subject for you so you knew where I stood. Let me know. If you're doing the 39 steps, let me know. And please tell me that I have not put you off the idea of reading it if you're reading it for the first time. I was only bringing up the notes that I did because they're unavoidable. You're going to notice them. And again, I want to point out, I think it's a good thing that we're noticing these things. I think you probably hate the kind of Twitter scolds that I'm talking about as much as I do. But that doesn't change the fact that we are more sensitive to these things than we should be. So it's good that they're jumping right off the page. They jumped right off the page at me. I remember the first time I read this book. I barely thought about anything that was in it. I barely thought about any of the bigotries that are in it. Now, they're much more noticeable. I don't want them banned. I don't want the author canceled, but they're definitely there. But anyway, that's the 39 steps. Let me know if you're planning on reading this for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. I'd love to know how you're getting along with it. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.